So, have you ever jumped into something and you start trying to do whatever you're trying to do, and then you realize maybe you missed step one? Then maybe you should have read the manual first, or maybe you should have taken the course. Maybe this would have been a lot easier. I'd be willing to bet for a lot of you that has happened. I know it's definitely happened in my world. Well, I've been having so much fun on this YouTube channel and with my The Path podcast that I recently realized maybe I missed step one, that maybe I should have shared some information with you first to help you get comfy with my podcast or my YouTube channel. So, this is what I'm going to do today. We're going to talk about the accepted truths. Let's talk about it. Bonjour, Mishko Paganan, Quain Adishnakas Mandodem. Hi, everybody. My name is Sandy Boucher. I'm Red Thunderbolt Woman of the Loon Clan, a proud member of Seine River First Nation in Treaty 3 territory in Northern Ontario. And as mentioned in the opening, today we're talking about the accepted truths. Now, these come directly out of the pages of my book, The Path, which was Communication Strategies for the Reconciliation Era. This book is literally the action plan we need to get us to reconciliation. There's actually one for non-Indigenous people and one for Indigenous people. If you haven't checked out my book yet, I highly suggest you do that. You just go over to my website and check it out. The whole idea behind the accepted truths is that when I wrote the book, I didn't want it to be the size of War and Peace or a set of encyclopedias. And I'm definitely showing my age here because youth today probably don't know what encyclopedias are. But I digress. So, what I suggested in the beginning of the book is that there are 10 things. I have the paper right here. And if you're interested in getting your copy, as always, send me an email. So, what I suggested was there are 10 things that we just need to agree on. And if you don't agree on these yet, you're probably not ready to read this book. You need to go do some learning first. And same kind of thing with my podcast or my YouTube channel. These are the kind of things that we need to agree on. We can't keep debating these forever. And if you don't, well, that's extra work you need to be doing on your side of the feather. So let's start with the accepted truths. First, reconciliation is personal. It involves pain. People are hurt to different degrees. I have long said there is going to be no pan-Canadian solution. There's not going to be one act of legislation that makes this all okay because Indigenous nations are different. Indigenous people are different. What one nation needs to feel we have reconciled may be totally different from another nation. That is not being difficult. That's reality. What your friend thinks you need to do to reconcile with your partner and what your partner thinks you need to do, entirely different things. And what your friend thinks you should do is irrelevant. If you want to reconcile, you need to be talking to your partner and figuring out what it's going to take to do that. So it's personal. We have to recognize the autonomy of the different nations, their differences, and in the people. We saw this in the Buffy Sainte-Marie thing, that how I reacted to it was incredibly different from how other Indigenous people acted. And I'm not talking about the non-Indigenous in this case. I'm talking about the Indigenous that her actions hurt. And that is different. We were the hurt party. And that's why I said I stand behind the chief of Payapot First Nation. That nation was directly dragged into the insanity. They get to decide what they need to reconcile. And they've decided a DNA test. I support that. Okay, second point. I'm hoping this was obvious in your time on my YouTube channel or listening to my podcast. Point number 2 is that reconciliation is a learning curve. Now, I'm hoping you all know what a learning curve is. That's that first day in a new office, or at first day at school in a new school or in a new community where you don't know the basics. You don't know where the bathroom is. You don't know where the grocery store is. You're not sure where your classroom is. You're not sure where your office is. You don't know what time coffee breaks are and how long the coffee breaks are. You need to find out. That's a learning curve. And I'd be willing to bet that most non-Indigenous Canadians can feel this. They feel like they don't know anything. They're totally confused. They don't want to say the wrong thing, but no one taught them this stuff. That's a learning curve, which means if you feel that way, you're totally accurate. That's what it feels like to be in a learning curve. Not exactly comfortable, but you will get out of it. Next, along the lines of the autonomy of the First Nations. Number 3 is that everyone paddles at a different pace, which means you can look at the First Nations across Canada. Some are really close to self-determination. They don't want the restrictions of the federal government. They have built the infrastructure. They have the capacity to run their communities, their nation, and they want the ability to do that. Yay, kudos. There are other nations that would implode if that happened, not because they don't have the ability to or the intelligence to. They haven't built the infrastructure and the capacity yet. And that's probably a whole bunch of restrictions and running into walls trying to negotiate with the federal government. So, again, we're not judging. We're acknowledging that some people are at the beginning of this river and some are halfway down. Everyone paddles at a different pace. It's always lunchtime when I try to do this, and I start yawning when I need to eat. For my non-Indigenous viewers, that paddling at a different pace applies to you too. Some people watch one of my videos and they totally get it right away because of what they were exposed to earlier. You may not, and that's totally okay. You're paddling at a different pace. What I suggest is you paddle at a pace that's comfortable for you, right? That's why I do shorter daily videos during the week, just a little 5-10 minutes out of your day. So it's not overwhelming. It's not that full day seminar commitment, but you're taking steps. What I love, one of the comments I love the most is when one of my YouTube subscribers emails me and lets me know, or they comment on the thread, that they have learned so much since they found their channel. Now, I hope they realize they're recognizing the steps they've taken or the distance they've traveled on this river. They're not where they first got in the canoe. They have paddled and they are going on their journey. Now, for some people, they don't think it happens fast enough. I'm Indigenous. Trust me. I know what it's like to feel like change isn't happening fast enough, but it is happening. Indian time. It's happening as it's meant to. Notice how I'm tying all these videos together? It's all one big puzzle. Did it again. Next one. When I share this one, because The Path, which is the name of my book, is also one of my most popular full day seminars. So I've shared this with many audiences, usually an Indigenous, non-Indigenous audience. So they're both there, and the discussions that come out of it during the exercises are just mind-blowing. They learn as much from each other as they do from me. I just create the space for them. It's phenomenal. But they get kind of quiet when I say this next one. So the accepted truth number 4 is that reconciliation isn't the only option. And I know I kind of alluded to that in a comment on the other day. And basically I said something along the lines of Canada's going to get it together because we're not going to wait forever. And we're already seeing it in Indigenous communities that are choosing which businesses they're going to do business with. And if you have not done your training and you don't know The phrases you shouldn't use, like one strike, you're out of there. They just do not have time. We have put up with the BS long enough. We're just not playing anymore. And we will find people because they do exist. So I'm hoping, and I work every single day towards Canada and the Indigenous nations reconciling. There are some that don't want to. And there's some that would just like to see any relationship between Canada and the Indigenous nations end. Um, I'm not going to sit in judgment of that. I totally understand it. And that comes from frustration. We got to get this together. Please do not focus on that fact. Focus on what you want to achieve, which is reconciliation. Now, number 5, we touched on. Every single time I talk about the back-to-back teaching, it's part of Accepted Truth number 5, which is, quote unquote, it is impossible for one culture to accurately and completely interpret the actions, thoughts, or desires of another culture. You don't have the lens. You don't see things the way we see things. You do not need to understand why we see things the way we see them. You have to accept we do. I don't understand the worship of the clock that I talked about in another video, but I accept that is important to my non-Indigenous colleagues, and they want this meeting to end in 1 hour, so it has to. That makes sense. Okay? Number 6, you have heard me say this a million times, and you know what would make me really happy is if you're starting to say it. What am I talking about? The fact that ego burns bridges, but humility builds them. Ego burns bridges, but humility builds them. Love it. Now, number 7, I've been doing this work for a long time, remember. A lot of non-Indigenous people didn't know this or don't know this, but so do a lot of Indigenous people. They don't have this knowledge either. What I'm talking about, I really have to eat something before I shoot these videos. I'm so sorry. Number 7, prior to contact, so prior to the settlers arriving, we belonged to separate, functioning, yet very different societies. Remember when I talked about the Elmer Fudd settler coming into an Anishinaabe nation and he didn't see the church, he didn't see the school, he didn't see a town hall, made all of these assumptions? We didn't have those buildings, but we had a governance system. We had our spirituality. We had education systems. We had a justice system. They didn't look anything like their European counterparts, but they existed. And our societies functioned incredibly well in the same way that European communities functioned. Different. So when I'm working in a First Nation community, like we don't want that baked in dependence, believing that they have to be like mainstream to survive. Mainstream is destroying the planet. So maybe we need to meet in the middle of the bridge and remember how we did things when the planet wasn't at risk. That was Red Thunderbolt Blunt. Number 8, and we have touched on this one in the news. Not recently, but definitely when the Pope came to Canada. Understanding that the settlers were guided by 2 key concepts, the doctrine of discovery, and that definitely hit the newspapers, and this concept of terra nullius. So if you don't know what this is and why they wanted the doctrine of discovery just rescinded, the doctrine of discovery was the marching orders for the settlers, the first people that arrived. And what it basically said was that any land that was, quote unquote, not inhabited by Christians could be claimed in the name of the king or queen. Any land not inhabited by Christians would be considered vacant and could be claimed in the name of the king or queen. Do you see the train coming? Do you see the accident about to happen? The land was inhabited by many, many, many First Nations from coast to coast, from north to south. We were literally everywhere, and you can Google that to prove it to yourself. But we weren't Christian. So the land was considered vacant. Terra nullius is Latin for land that is vacant. Terra nullius, earth, nothing. Do you see the problem? We were about to be crushed and burned. There, I can remember, now I'm older, remember, 59 years old. I can remember in like history class seeing these posters, and they're all over the internet. I'll get my videographer to put in one that said like free land, come and get 60 acres, free land. And I can remember this is how warped growing up in Canada is for Indigenous people. My parents didn't have a dime to their name, even though my dad worked full time, and later on my mom did too. I can remember seeing those posters, and I was in a younger grade, like grade 3, grade 4, and thinking, well, I wish my parents had lived in that time because you know what? Them getting 60 free acres, my dad would have worked really hard to clear it. My mom would have been there right with him. Never realizing that land was inhabited, or the Indigenous people that were on that land just got moved out of the way so the settlers could have it. My mom would have been moved out of the way. They don't tell that part in history class. Kind of hoping they do now. Number 9, we have to accept as truth that assimilation was the goal behind the residential school system and the 60s scoop. And many would offer or argue the child welfare system. So, what does that mean? There are still people out there that are saying residential schools were a good idea because the kids got an education. That was not the intent. Remember Chief Tony Alexis, my friend? It always starts with intent. The intent was to kill the Indian in the child. That's a quote, right? So they wanted to remove, I'm going to put up Sir John A. Macdonald's quote here. You're going to want to pause the video to read this. You're going to want to brace yourself before you read this. Awesome. That was the intent, to separate the child from their parents so they weren't just an Indian that knows how to read and write, that they would become white, that they would kill the Indian in the child. That was the intent of the residential school system. And then 60 Scoop was just the next manifestation. By the way, the residential schools, last one closed in 96. Saw someone comment about how long ago they were. That's not that long ago. I was born way before that. Anyways, I digress. 60 Scoop. Again, they were taking Indigenous children, removing them far from their home communities and putting them with non-Indigenous families. And the child welfare system, the fact that a high percentage, most of the kids in care are Indigenous, again, not in Indigenous homes for the most part, not exposed to their culture, removed from their community and all their supports, and everyone who loves them. It continues. And that's why I'm such an advocate for any, like, assimilation has to stop. We need to build bridges and create spaces where we get to be Indigenous. We can work with you. We can meet you in the middle of the bridge. We do not need to be like non-Indigenous. And last but not least, here I am hitting my microphone again, and I moved it, so it should have been better, but I think it's better. Oh, this one. If there was ever a part in the book, in any of my books, that I wish I hadn't put in there, that I would rethink how I explained it, it's this part. Although with the whole, all the Marvel movies and all of that coming out, DC helped, definitely helped. In the book, I refer to parallel universes, and I'm old enough to remember having comic books when I was a kid. And there was like the Earth and then the other Earth in a parallel universe, and things happen differently in the parallel universe. I live in the city of Thunder Bay in northern Ontario, a city known for its anti-Indigenous racism. I have long said there are two different Thunder Bays. There is the Thunder Bay for the non-Indigenous people who love skiing here and love the Sleeping Giant and Mount McKay and all of the tourist attractions, and Lake Superior is so gorgeous and blah, blah, blah. And then there's the Indigenous Thunder Bay where the racism is blatant and we're still people turning up their noses or rolling their eyes or sniffing your breath to see if you've been drinking. That happened to a very well-known comedian that came to our community, Indigenous. Yeah, welcome to Thunder Bay. So, number 10 of the accepted truth says parallel universes exist, and there are people who may not feel welcome or comfortable in your universe, even if you've strived to ensure everyone is. Intent is often not enough. So that's why we got to get good at creating safe spaces. So I'm just going to do a very quick review here of the accepted truths found in the path. 1, reconciliation is personal. 2, reconciliation is a learning curve. 3, everyone paddles at a different pace. 4, reconciliation isn't the only option. 5, it is impossible for one culture to accurately and completely interpret the actions, thoughts, or desires of another culture. 6, ego burns bridges, humility builds them. 7, prior to contact, we belong to separate, functioning, yet very different societies. 8, settlers were guided by 2 key concepts, the doctrine of discovery and terra nullius. 9, assimilation was the goal behind both the residential school system and the 60s scoop and the child welfare system. And 10, parallel universes exist, and there are people who may not feel welcome or comfortable in your universe, even if you have strived to ensure everyone is. I am hoping you scored 10 out of 10. If you did, then I'd be willing to bet you are ready to learn from the videos I share. If you are still struggling with some of those, you owe it to yourself to get the information you need. Those are the truth. And if you can't see that yet, that just means you got to add to your perspective. I hope that helped. I'm excited to see you next week with a whole other round of videos. You take care of yourself. I love you. Take care. Bye-bye.